tax regime must be cognizant of the fact that many businesses have actually been affected. How do we navigate this?
We are very happy that infrastructure is being done. For example, the meter gauge railway to Malaba, the meter gauge railway to Kisumu, and the port rehabilitation of Kisumu. These are enablers of business expansion. And if we don't do these things, then other countries will take advantage. Uganda now has approached Tanzania to see how they can handle their logistics. And unless Kenya does something very serious between the Great Lakes region and the northern corridor and also the Lapset area, we are going to be trading just among ourselves instead of encouraging international trade with our neighbors.
Well, Kenyans and of course the business community have constantly said that they are willing to pay taxes. But one thing that has actually come out of them also is the fact that the government must do much in terms of fighting corruption, because this country is actually losing quite a lot in terms of stolen resources. Going into this year, which areas do you expect the government to actually tighten the nooses in terms of ensuring that we lose very minimal in terms of public resources?
Corruption has been a very big letdown in this country. We have had people asked to step aside so that their cases can be investigated, and 3 years down the line, those cases are not concluded, and the country is not gaining that money. We must find a way of making sure that our investigative agencies and prosecutorial agencies do their work and deliver so that corruption can be tamed.
Israel, apart from being the chair of the National Chamber of Commerce and Industry in this region, you're also an ordinary mwananchi. What are your expectations in conclusion?
We expect things like tax on fuel, which is affecting everybody from the fishmonger to the mega companies who are transporting cement and so on. This affects everybody, and even matatus and the passengers. So we need to look at this and make sure that our people can move reasonably, at a reasonable cost.
Thank you very much, Israel Lagina, of course, the chair of the National Chambers of Commerce and Industry in this region, of course, putting us into perspective of exactly what the business community is expecting from today's budget estimates from the government. Of course, we will be sampling more views. Of course, my colleague, Weekly for Cash, will be talking to the ordinary mwananchi later on, so that then he can actually also bring to the fore the perspectives of or the expectations of wananchi from this region. Back to you, Irene.
Achola Simon, live from the county of Kisumu on this important day in the country's calendar, where the national government will be reading the 2021-2022 budget, and this will be read at the Parliament buildings by Finance Minister Ukur Yatani. Now, as Achola mentioned earlier, the business sector has been affected, but that is not the only industry that has been affected. We also have other stakeholders in the agriculture sector, the health sector, who are also raising concerns. A section of farmers earlier on talked to Channel 1 and said they want the government to reduce the prices on seeds, fertilizers, and also training. And they also noted it is important for the government to consider the cost of processing these products, which has affected the farmers in the country. And remember this, they say that farming is the backbone of food production in the country, and thus should be considered in the budget. They also talked about the effect of transportation of goods from the farms to the market. Some of them, as I mentioned earlier, taking home nothing from what they spent on. The health sector is also another issue of concern. Many Kenyans want the health sector to be addressed in the 2021-2022 budget. This, as many said, the cost of health facilities procedures has been on the rise, especially amid the COVID-19 pandemic. Many Kenyans want the government to come up with a strategy on how they'll be able to access the COVID-19 treatment. And this as they also call for improved road infrastructure. They say this will be able to make work easier, not only for the production, but also the supply of services inside and outside various counties. Remember, the county governments have also been affected in the 2020-2021 budget, and county governors have been at the fore, raising concerns on issuance of funds to the county government on time. And tax experts have also been able to share their ideas, and today my colleague Regina Manyara is pitching camp at the Strathmore University, where we're expecting her to bring us an in-depth analysis with economists and tax experts in not only in the county of Nairobi, but across the country. And she is joining us now live from Strathmore University. Regina, give us a feel of what we should expect from the university today. Good morning. We apologize for that technical hitch. Regina Manyara will be getting back to us from the Strathmore University, where she is preparing to engage tax experts as well as economists to be able to bring for us the feel of the expectations of the 2021-2022 budget. And before we engage Regina, let's get the feel of what Kenyans want in the 2021-2022 budget. And many Kenyans want the budget to prioritize social economic sectors in a bid to cushion them from the current tough economic challenges. Speaking to KBC Channel 1, those in various parts of the country said that the allocation of funds to social programs will shield them from unemployment, high cost of goods and services, and the high cost of living. The remarks comes hours before the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani presents the 3.366 trillion shillings in the National Assembly.
Taxes, PPPs, or borrowing. Here are opinions of various Kenyans who feel that this budget should be more mindful of their pockets.
Naona wanashughulikia sana infrastructure nini, but tunafurahia for those hizo ma projects pia wanafanya, but tungependa pia washughulikie wasekaa sisi.
Ni ajira ama ni chakula ama ni ukulima ama ni mambo ya barabara. Kama ningekutana na yeye saa hizi, pesa mingi sana angeiweka katika agriculture.
Unajua saa hii life ya saa hii by the way ni tricky sana na ni hard. Na kitu ya kwanza lazima tuwekwe into considerations kama wananchi. Na kitu yoyote kabla ipitishwe ama iamuliwe, sisi wananchi tunafaa tuongee, wapeleke bunge watutetee ikuwa approved.
Kusema ukweli tunapitia shida sana. Kwanza tangu hii mambo ya kuwa port imetolewa, mambo mengi yameenda Nairobi, biashara haiendi kabisa. Hivi hata tunasikia wanataka kutuongezea gesi tena. License, kila kitu imeenda juu. Tulikuwa tunaomba hii budget ipunguzie mwananchi wa kawaida, naye aweze kusikia vizuri.
Serikali saidie watu wa agriculture kwa sababu wanaumia na wanasol sana. So at least hapo ndio wanadepend, wanapata chakula nini.
And my views about the budget is first, who are the target group? Those targeted by the budget are the poor and the marginalized. And we are from COVID, meaning that most people have not been trading, or they have not been trading to the full capacity.
Tunauliza, je, ni siku gani budget itasomwa tusikie tumeangushiwa vitu badala ya kuwa tunapandishiwa vitu kila wakati.
The 2021-2022 3.6 trillion shillings Kenyan budget has been received with mixed reactions here on the streets, with Kenyans saying they need the shillings to go directly to their pockets rather than major infrastructure projects. Alan Aoko reporting for Channel One Business in Nairobi.
Thank you, Alan, for that report. In other news, the ongoing COVID-19 vaccination has been lauded as a major step towards the resumption of activities in the travel and hospitality industry, which has borne the brunt of disruptions caused by pandemic. Ahead of presentations of the 3.66 trillion shillings budget, PKF CEO Alpesh Varder says some of the coronavirus containment measures, such as the night curfew, are hurting the hospitality industry and other sectors.
For the year ending June 30th, government has undertaken several initiatives towards tourism recovery, among them 500 million shillings for marketing, while 2 billion shillings was set aside to support renovation of facilities and the restructuring of business operations. 1 billion shillings stimulus package was earmarked for engaging 5,500 community scouts under the Kenya Wildlife Service, and another 1 billion shillings to support 160 community conservancies. However, 1 year on, the biting effect of COVID-19 is still reverberating in the hospitality value chain.
Wakati ule kwanza mwaka jana tulisikia kwamba serikali ilikuwa na mpango wa economic stimulus package ama plan kwa ajili ya mashirika ambayo yanafanya kazi ya utalii. Sisi tukiwa wadau katika mambo ya utalii hatukuwa na chochote kutokana na ile economic stimulus plan ya serikali.
Secondly, we have really struggled as an industry. Quite a few members of staff had to lose their jobs and so on and so forth.
Data from the Kenya Private Sector Alliance indicates that at least 3.1 million jobs in travel and tourism were affected in the year 2020 as hotels, bars and restaurants, tour operators, airlines, travel agents and their suppliers and support services recorded low business.
Sasa tuna expect unajua maisha imekuwa ni ngumu sana kwa kila kitu iko juu, alafu tumetoka wakati wa COVID. Mafuta bei yake ilikuwa imeenda juu na spare parts za gari zilikuwa zinaenda juu, alafu magari mingi zetu ni za loan. Kwa hivyo ile tuna expect, lakini sasa hatulalamiki sana. Ni tu Mombasa because we depend on tourism. Tuna expect tu serikali iendelee kufanya juu chini kupata tourist, alafu maneno ingine kama ya mafuta waangalie, kwa sababu hiyo bei ya mafuta ikienda juu sana pia bei zetu zitaenda juu, alafu unaona hiyo itakuwa mbaya sana kwa customers.
For taxi drivers, Kiro businesses, among the several indirect dependents of the hospitality industry, anxiety is rife with the looming threat of a fourth wave of the COVID-19 pandemic.
Tuweke katika bajeti ile katika mipangilio ya economic stimulus, waangalie watuweke, lakini wasiseme kwamba watakuja kutukopesha, because kama sababu tukopesha mkopo tutatoa pesa kulipo ile mkopo. Hakuna utalii completely kabisa.
The expectation is that the proposed budget will make provisions for industry players to remain afloat.
This is a good thing. All the staff are vaccinated. We are telling the marketplace that we are a safe place to go, and if people come, they'll be safe. However, for us to be even safer, as many people as possible in the country should also be vaccinated. So we pray that the rollout of the vaccination will go on and help many people.
However, for accounting expert Alpesh Varder, the ongoing vaccination exercise is key towards the resumption of activities in the hospitality industry.
We are roughly about 7 billion in the entire world. So how are we going to get 7 billion people vaccinated in a short span of time? So we can't go into a full lockdown, open and close and reopen. So I think we just have to learn how to live with COVID.
He further proposed government to involve the private sector in COVID-19 vaccine sourcing to hasten the intervention. All eyes are focused on Ukur Yatani's briefcase and its contents for the hospitality industry. Regina Manyara focused on the 2021-2022 budget.
Indeed, the 2021-2022 budget should consider the tourism industry, considering that the tourism stakeholders have been at the fore to ask the government to come up with strategies in uplifting the status of the sector, and they would urge you not to cancel your travel, but instead change the date. Regina Manyara Gitau is now in the Strathmore University, and she is ready with the taxpayers and economists on the expectations of the 2021-2022 budget. Regina, give us a feel of what is happening and our expectations from you at the Strathmore University. Good morning once again.
Thank you very much, Irene Mchuma. Rightly put, we are coming to you live from the Strathmore Business School at a time when all Kenyans are really expecting and very expectant of what Ukur Yatani's briefcase is going to have for them. Wanjiko is complaining about the high cost of living, while investors, both local and international, are keenly looking at what the amendments to the Finance Bill 2021 are going to portend for their businesses. The government intends to spend a cool 3.66 trillion shillings in the next financial year. This is exactly 210 billion shillings more than what was approved by the BPS. Question is Kenya biting too much to handle? That question is going to be answered in not too long, because I have a panelist made up of investment analysts as well as a tax expert to help us unpack the Finance Bill 2021, as well as try and preempt what the National Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani is going to be presenting this afternoon. Just to take you back, what has been happening over the last week. Yesterday, the budget, the national chairman, the National Assembly, we had the Budget Committee Chair, MP Kanini Kega, presenting the budget estimates that were approved. That's where we got the numbers from, with current expenditure being pegged at 1.29 trillion, while 666.5 billion shillings is going to go into development. With 13 months before the general elections, questions have been put to: is really this government going to achieve the Big Four agenda, or is it time that we started planning for the Big Four agenda beyond 2022? That is in specific to have it factored in the fourth Vision 2030 plan. Long term after this particular tenure of President Uhuru Kenyatta, then, is a Big Four plan, is a Big Four agenda going to be realized? That's one of the questions that was asked yesterday in Parliament. This struggle of pending bills that has affected all MDAs as well as businesses. Despite the president's directive there to have these particular pending bills paid, a majority of businesses and MDAs are yet to receive the full payment of this, therefore affecting all sectors. Issues of foreign exchange. The tourism sector is one of the country's main income earner when it comes to foreign exchange earnings. But to the global shocks and COVID-19 restrictions to travel, we have seen this industry bearing the brunt of COVID-19. So what is the plan? Are we going to be focusing on efforts to revive and stabilize the domestic sector so that it can support this otherwise lucrative sector? That's another question we're going to be having. Now, let's look at the cost of living. Over the last few months, fuel prices have been on an upward trajectory. And Kenyans have been saying that this is getting out of hand, because once the prices of fuel go up, it means basically everything else goes up. Under some of the proposals that have been made in the Finance Bill 2021 is to increase VAT, or rather move green energy, what we refer to as solar, from zero rated to tax exempt. This means that these particular gadgets are set to become expensive. Further on, let's look at the households. There's a proposal to introduce VAT on essential goods, namely infant milk as well as bread and motorcycles. What this means is that a majority of Kenyans will not be able to meet their day-to-day expenses. And that's why this particular presentation in the afternoon by the National Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani is very important to a majority of Kenyans, and that is Wanjiko. When it comes to matters of investment, and Kenya has been priding itself as an ideal investment place, or rather country. Now the government intends, or rather there's a proposal to introduce VAT on exported services. What does this mean for such projects like Konza that will heavily rely on exported services? All this is going to be put into perspective by the analysts that we have with us here this morning, and we are also opening up these channels to Kenyans who are watching this particular broadcast on our official station handle, that is at KBC Channel 1 News. What are your expectations of the budget 2021-2022? In not too long, I'll be introducing my panelists and get, or rather where the rubber hits the road, where we talk about those numbers and our expectations. I'm Regina Manyara. Briefly, we'll be getting back and getting to meet our panelists.
Thank you, Regina, reporting live from the Strathmore University, where she is preparing to engage tax experts and economists on the expectations of the 2021-2022 budget. This ahead of its reading at Parliament buildings by Finance Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani, who will be making his way from Treasury buildings later on this afternoon to Parliament buildings. And he will be reading out not only to Kenyans, but also legislators and other guests who will be invited at Parliament buildings. Security has been heightened in and around the Parliament buildings, and this is to ensure that everything runs as planned by the national government, as much as expectations for Kenyans are high. My colleague Junei Karisa is in the county of Mombasa. Junei, good morning in the county of Mombasa. It is one of the regions that has been highly affected in the hospitality industry, and many hospitality stakeholders are optimistic that in the 2021-2022 budget, the national government will consider strategies that will ensure the industry gets a boost this year and also beyond. Junei, good morning.
Good morning, Ivan Chuma. As you have rightly put it, yes, indeed, the hospitality industry is expecting that Ukur Yatani gives them some of the incentives. Now, let me just break it down to you shortly. According to the Kenya Federal Employers, 1.7 million formal employments were lost in the year 2019 alone. Here in Mombasa County, in the hospitality sector, 12,000 jobs were lost in this particular sector. Now, this is a big loss, putting in mind that the coast region solely depends on the tourism sector so that they can make a living. And of course, the government put in place economic stimulus packages for these particular stakeholders. However, most of them, they say they were reluctant to enroll or take some of these packages, saying that the conditions that were there, they were extreme and they couldn't meet them. They're saying that they were running into losses. So how can they make an investment in this COVID-19 pandemic times when they're not guaranteed whether they'll earn a shilling or whether the tourists will be able to come in into the country, considering the factor of the pandemic. So they are advocating for a tax break to be introduced. We have seen the county government of Mombasa introduce some of these tax breaks for the stakeholders, but they're saying that it is not enough. If the government is able to introduce some of these tax breaks, then they can be able to caution themselves, employ some of these people that were retrenched earlier on, so that they can be able to revive and come out of these losses that they incurred during this particular pandemic. Now, it's just not the hospitality industry that is grappling with some of these conditions that have been placed for some of these stimulus packages that the government is enrolling. Of course, even Biashara people here in Mombasa, they are grappling with some of these measures that are in place. They are advocating if the government can be able to the loans that they are being given by the banks, if they can be able to add some more time for the people so that they can be able to meet some of the investments that they are doing here in Mombasa County. So, and just to tell me how he says, have you received, good morning, have you received any
We do apologize for that technical hitch. June Karisa reporting live from the county of Mombasa, where she was painting the picture on how businesses have been affected, especially amid the COVID-19 pandemic. And this year, having the cost of fuel increased by the Energy Regulatory Authority from 1 month to the other, with the effect of this resolution coming back to the common man who is feeling the pain at the pump. And many traders have felt the impact. Those also have raised concerns on how they're able to run their businesses and also count on putting on profits in these businesses, especially amid the COVID-19 pandemic, where not only the hospitality sector was affected, but also other businesses. Several stakeholders have been raising concerns on which way forward now that 2020 is gone. 2021 we're here. Next year, 2022, the country will be heading or would be heading to the next general election, and everyone needs to be prepared in terms of budget and also be able to cope up with the high cost of living, which has made many families to go an extra mile to put food on the table. Now, shifting focus to the county of Kisumu, my colleague Wycliffe Okech is on standby. Okech, good morning. What do you have for us?
Well, a very good morning to you, Irene Muchuma, back at the broadcasting house. I am indeed coming to you live from the city center here in Kisumu, and it is, of course, an important day today in the country when the CS for Treasury and National Treasury and Planning is set to unveil the next financial year's budget. And, of course, so many Kenyans have got very many different expectations ahead of the unveiling of the next financial year's budget. And here I am. Earlier on, my colleague Achola Simon brought to you the perspective of the business community, where he got it directly from the chairperson of the Chamber of Commerce and Industries in the Western region. And here I am already. I have a few, the ordinary people here, including the PSV operators and, of course, the border operators, who will share with us, of course, what they expect ahead of the unveiling of the budget. Allow me to engage a few of them, probably to get what they have to say in terms of expectations and what their views on the next year's financial year budget. Brother, no, just come in. Yeah, come. Valia maskiako vizuri?
Sema Amos.
You'll talk to us. Probably you'll tell us your name, what you do here around, and today is the budget unveiling day. What exactly do you expect today?
Kwa majina mimi naitwa Arnold Okoto. Mimi ni mfanyakazi wa bodaboda hapa Kisumu. Na changamoto tunapitia ni mambo na fuel kama sisi wa bodaboda. Sasa hizi kama fuel ni lita moja ni 130. Sasa hiyo ndio changamoto kubwa tunapitia hapa Kisumu kama mfanyakazi wa bodaboda hapa Kisumu.
Angalia kwa sauti. Ni nini hasa unatarajia serikali zingatie inapo soma bajeti yake kwa siku ya leo? Unazingatia nini kama wewe mwendeshaji wa bodaboda? What exactly do you expect that the government focuses on, especially that will benefit you directly?
Sasa mimi kama mtu wa bodaboda, kitu yenye ninafaa ni wanifanyie ni wanirudishie fuel ikuwe chini. Hiyo ndio kenye nalilia sana.
Okay, thank you. I hope that will be sorted on. Probably just one more. Brother, come closer and probably tell us what exactly do you expect ahead of. Just stand this way. What is it? What's your name? What work do you do here at this stage? And what exactly do you expect in today's budget unveiling?
Mi kwa majina naitwa Kevin huko, natoka upande wa game. Mi upande yangu ya hii budget ni ngumu sababu fuel imeongezwa. Mimi ni loader, mimi ni mtu wa kubeba mzigo. Kenya serikali ingenifanyia hiyo mambo ya budget washushe chini kidogo, sababu mimi pia ni kama Aslan naumia.
Anything more?
More ni sina mingi.
Okay, probably. Thank you. Irene, just allow me to engage one more, then we bring it back to you. What's your name, brother?
Okay, my name is Dennis Ouma.
Yeah. Today is the budget unveiling day. What is your expectation as even as an ordinary man, as a hawker? What exactly do you expect from the today's budget unveiling?
Okay, sisi kama mahoka tunaweza sema ya kwamba hii budget ambapo inasomwa hakuna faida ambapo tunapata, ni kwa sababu huwa inasomwa kila siku, kila mwaka, na unapata ya kwamba kila kitu inapanda, na unapata ya kwamba budget ikisomwa inastahili kila kitu irudishwe chini, na unapata zimepanda zote. So Mkenya wa kawaida ambapo ambapo maisha yake iko chini inazidi tu kuumia, sababu budget hakuna kitu yenye inamsaidia nayo.
Okay. Anything more?
I don't have anything more that I can add.
Thank you. Of course, Irene, like you've heard from the three people who have engaged so far, one thing that comes out clearly is the issue of the cost of living that, of course, emanates from the cost of fuel products. What we do know for sure is that when the cost of high fuel products is high, of course, that trickles down to other products, and like you heard it from PSV operators and even the border operators. They decried the high cost of fuel products that they say affects their business adversely, and their only cry today ahead of the unveiling of the 2021-2022 financial year budget, they really hope that the fuel product cost will actually be reduced so that the cost of living that, of course, has been hardened as well by the COVID-19 situation in the country will, of course, maybe bring an ease to their means of livelihood. Back to you, Irene.
Kate, before I let you go, I believe during the early morning hours you are by the lakeside and you are able to engage a number of fishermen, considering the county of Kisumu is prioritizing, among other activities, the fishing activities. What is the feel from the lake ahead of the reading of the budget this afternoon?
Well, even as we wait for the unveiling of this 2021-2022 financial year budget, of course, Irene, actually the fishing industry in the region here expect that the major expectation is that the infrastructural aspect will be considered. You do realize that transportation of the fish products from this side, actually being a lakeside county or a lakeside city, most residents here depend on the lake as their source of livelihood, and with that comes the expectation that in the infrastructure that allows for the transportation of their fishing products be eased, and that means, just like I mentioned here, with the infrastructure comes fueling products cost, and that added to it will mean that the fishermen, or rather the fish traders in this region, expect that the infrastructural aspect will be considered, as well as the cost of fuel products. One more thing.
Thank you, Kech. Weekly for Kech, our reporter based at the county of Kisumu, bringing us the picture and engaging some of the locals on the streets of Kisumu County. It's budget day and Kenyans are looking forward towards the spelling out of the budget, 2021-2022 budget by Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Ukur Yatani. KBC Channel 1 is keeping base across the country. In the county of Kisumu, we have Weekly for Kech and Achola Simon. In the county of Mombasa, we have Junei Karisa. At Parliament Buildings, we have O'Brien Kimani, and at the Strathmore University, we have Regina Manyara, who is ready to engage tax experts and economists on the expectations of the 2021-2022 budget. Regina, it has been a busy morning, and we have heard from various parts of the country, right from our correspondents and also from our reporters based in various parts of the country, and we are looking forward towards an interesting interview from you, Regina.
Or what government intends to spend is 3.66 trillion shillings
which is 210 billion shillings more than what was approved by the BPS. Now, yesterday in Parliament, the Budget Committee Chair, that is Kieni Member of Parliament, Kanini Kega, had the budget estimates approved, paving way for the presentation this afternoon. However, that particular committee has raised a few concerns, one of it being that the current debt situation is almost getting out of hand. They recommended that we adjust the debt ceiling from the current 9 trillion shillings upwards so that government can implement the budget that is 3.66 trillion shillings. Here's just a recap of what happened at the Parliament that is going to set a pace of our conversation this morning.
According to the approved budget estimates, the government expenditure under Consolidated Fund Services will increase by 24% to 1.33 trillion in the next financial year, starting next month, due to an increase in public debt service expenses, which constitute 88% of Consolidated Fund Service expenses.
The Consolidated Fund Services will amount to Kenya shilling 1.3 trillion shillings in the financial year 2021-2022. For the first time, the Consolidated Fund Services will surpass the recurrent budget that we have had. This is a 24% increase. That is by 253 billion from the financial year 2020 to 2021 levels, and is primarily on account of increased public debt.
The chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee of the National Assembly, Kanini Kega, has warned that implementation of the budget hangs in a balance owing to an increase in expenditure against diminished revenue returns.
Honorable Speaker, by end of March 2021, the public and public guaranteed stock of debt amounted to Kenya shilling 7,334 billion, representing 82% of the 9 trillion national debt ceiling. The committee is concerned.
Owing to this, the Budget Committee is recommending that Parliament increases the debt ceiling to give the government wiggle room against a shrinking budget flexibility. In the financial year 2021-2022, it estimates that the executive expenditure will account for 43% of the total annual budget and 65% of total revenue collected.
The financial year 2021-2022 budget may not be implementable if the debt ceiling is not adjusted.
The National Treasury projects a total revenue collection of 2 trillion shillings, an increase of 210 billion shillings year on year, with income tax projected to increase by 102 billion shillings to 835 billion.
But next week, the Finance Committee will be tabling our report on the finance bill. And at that point, we will be able to discuss adequately our revenue-raising measures and the proposals that have been made by the National Treasury, and what we have listened to as far as public participation is concerned, and what we are proposing moving forward. And at that point, we will be able to discuss into detail our revenue-raising measures.
However, the Budget Committee warns that the expected revenue performance is subject to economic recovery against risks such as COVID-19 disruptions, high cost of fuel, and political uncertainty.
Suffering out there, small scale people who are owned less than a million or two, and this would really help those people, some of whom are no longer existing.
The committee recommends that the National Treasury sets up a fund by October 2021 that may be financed through a long-term bond for the payment of existing verified pending bills and court awards.
The funds should be in place, Honorable Speaker, by the 1st of October 2021. Specifically, Mr. Speaker, there should be an infrastructural board. There are so many pending bills in the Ministry of Infrastructure. Mr. Speaker, if that one, of course, is done, definitely we'll be able to offset some of the debts that we have.
The adoption of the budget estimates by the Budget Committee is a prelude to the budget presentation of the 3.66 trillion shillings budget on Thursday afternoon by the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Okur Yetani. Regina Manyara reporting for Channel 1 Business.
That's just a recap of what transpired at the floor of the House yesterday, paving way for the presentation of the budget that is expected this afternoon by National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani. Gentlemen, I'm joined by a tax expert as well as an investment associate. On my extreme right is John Kuria, who is a tax partner at Kodi Africa. Welcome, sir, and thank you for your time.
Yeah.
And on my left, I'm joined by Caleb Bugendi, who is an investment associate at Jengas Capital. Karibu sana.
Thank you.
Now you've heard what happened yesterday at the floor of the House.
Yep.
Let's start off from there. What is your take from that particular piece? Let's start off with you, Mugendi.
Sure. What we had yesterday about the debt gross of debt stock being at 7.3 trillion shillings, and the ceiling still maintained at 9 trillion shillings. So there's an expectation that this should be amended. How we look at it is from the debt to service to the debt to GDP. Given that we don't have updated figures from 2020, KBC has not yet released the full year figures, we can just estimate that the GDP from the country is around 10 trillion shillings. So 7.3 trillion is more than 70% of GDP. So our debt stock is already more than 70% of GDP, which technically implies that we are currently at a debt distress level. So this debt, the stock of debt is rising at a rapid pace. We're still expecting this budget for full year 2021-22 for it to even increase by close to 1.3 trillion, and this will come very close to the 9 trillion debt ceiling. So that is one of the takeaways that should be either amended and still be rooted from the point of our GDP is not growing as fast as the way that our debt is ballooning.
Mm-hmm. Now, Kuria there, I heard one of the members of the budget committee, that is none other than Honorable Gladys Wanga, there coming out and say that they're going to be giving recommendations as to, what the taxman has been doing to ensure that they rake in the requisite revenue to finance this particular budget. From where you sit, what would be the likely or rather channels? Or rather, what have you had from that particular piece before we get to the nitty-gritty?
Yes, yeah. Now, definitely, tax measures are going to be very, very important. And we do expect that what is going to happen is that, the budget will have to be, or rather the taxes have to be flexed, meaning that there is definitely going to be an increase in the taxes. When you look at the projection, they are looking at an increase of almost about 100 billion from just income tax alone, let alone the other taxes as well. Mm-hmm. So I do expect that the tax measures are going to, definitely the government has to come up with a cocktail of tax measures that are going to ensure that they are able to support the budget. Just like Mugendi has mentioned, there's already a deficit, and the deficit is quite significant. You're talking about 3.6 trillion versus 2 trillion of tax collections from the Revenue Authority, from KRA, which is projected. So already there's a deficit of almost 1.6 trillion. Mm-hmm. Some of the tax measures we've seen, there's definitely VAT that's going to come back on bread essentials. Yeah.
Let's not preempt that. We've already talked about the taxation policy, so we'll get into the details of that. Now, Caleb, let's start off with you from that, picking up from what you just said, the lack of concise data that informs these key indicators, even with the numbers that we've already gotten there. Now we know government intends to spend 3.66 trillion shillings, where 1.29 is going to be recurrent expenditure, and 666.5 billion is going to be on development. Yet we do not have accurate data informing us. What are the dangers? Are we going in blind? Kale.
Sure. Well, the 1.2 trillion versus the 600 in development is around 60-30 recurrent versus development, which has been close to what we've seen in the previous years. So that trend is still continuing. However, what is of concern again is we don't have yet updated data. We know 2020 was a tough year in terms of the economic performance. We had the COVID-19 pandemic. So we do expect that either the economy shrunk a bit or there was little to no growth. So we are still basing then this data off the 2019 numbers, where GDP was around 9.5 to 10 trillion shillings. So still in terms of
how much are we able to collect in terms of the KRA revenue authority? We're still collecting around 1.2 to 1.7 trillion. So this still has a big gap. We're still having a big gap that still has to be plugged by debt.
Plugged by debt there.
Yes.
Let me interject that. Then before we get into the issue of the taxation measures and the tax policy that we have really delved into, is that this particular proposed budget is very much anchored on the growth, GDP growth. The projection is at 6.3% in the financial year 2021. I can see you smiling. Is it so far-fetched? Because you're looking at 6.3%.
1, 2, 3, 4,
2021-2022, and the medium term 6.1%.
Well, it is a beautiful morning. Probably maybe.
Numbers to be a bit softer than initially expected. So I'm still in the range of thinking that we might grow between 4 and 5%, depending on the base, which is 2020, if it was flat. Again, this year, we did expect a lot of rebound. However, if you look at businesses, or if you talk to businesses, SMEs that are driving the economy, there's still a lot of pain. I don't think that the rebound has been that robust as initially expected. So we still expect businesses are still operating below capacity. We still need to ramp up production and productivity in the various sectors of the economy.
Now, still on you, what are the risks to the macroeconomic growth from where you sit?
The risks, especially, the main risk is the rollout of the vaccination program. We do expect that it should pick up. I think we're now at 1 million persons who have been vaccinated against a population around 2% of the entire population. And this is not yet enough to achieve herd immunity. So we do need these numbers to ramp up in the course of the year, so that we can safely go back to the productivity levels that we had seen before. So that's the major risk, a slowdown in the rollout of the vaccination program, and also in terms of stimulus to the SMEs. We'll also get into crowding out of the private sector by the government, because it's going to borrow a bit more heavily from the local market. That will also affect SMEs and businesses that are looking for credit and they're not able to access it.
Let me throw this to you, Kuria. The issue when it comes to macroeconomic risks, issues of fluctuation of foreign exchange rates.
Yeah.
As it is, we're already having global fuel prices and such, and also now tourism is already taking a hard hit. What's your take in regard to this?
Yes.
Is this something that we need to be worried about?
Yes, we need to be worried about it, because we can see a big chunk of our economy is asleep, especially on the tourism, which is a major foreign currency earner. So what I anticipate is going to happen is that even with the rollout of the vaccine, like Mugeni has just said, it's going to still take a longer time for that recovery to be realized. So which will definitely also mean that it's going to take a longer time for the economy to start seeing opening up of the economy because of tourism, which therefore means that when we look at our exchange rates, currency fluctuations, we do expect that this is going to be a norm. It's going to continue for quite a bit. So we do expect to see the shilling depreciating further. And as you can see globally, the rollout of the vaccine in the other countries, especially the Western countries, is almost reaching levels where herd immunity is going to be achieved. But in Africa, Kenya in particular, we're still at very low levels. So, yeah.
Do you think if we had the private sector included in the value chain as far as supply and distribution of these particular vaccines are concerned, it would hasten the vaccination and also just help us get back to the norm?
Yes, it would. Yes, it would. And I would also have, but again, it also depends on availability. So if it was possible to probably widen the manufacture of the vaccines, it would have helped. And also, of course, enhance distribution. Yeah. Yes.
Now, political uncertainty ahead of the electioneering period always affects investment.
Yep.
Banks will hold back credit, investments, and investors will wait and see that uncertainty.
Yep.
How is it likely to affect, the growth over the is it one of the risks? How is it going to affect our growth when we say post-recovery, post-COVID recovery? From where you see?
Sure. As we go into an electioneering period, a lot of investors do adopt a wait-and-see approach, especially going into this next fiscal year, because we just have 1 year until the election period starts. So there will be a lot of wait-and-see, because usually the market also moves in a bit of sometimes some cycles, especially when there's a handover in the reins of government per se. So we do expect investors to still adopt that wait-and-see approach, which will now be exacerbated by the COVID recovery not being as robust as we had expected.
Now that you've mentioned COVID, there's already uncertainty around the business community with the call or the warning that we might be riding the fourth wave, and we will likely to see strict or more stringent COVID measures.
Yep.
How will this impact on what we're saying that this is a roadmap to recovery post-COVID?
Well, again, with the expectation possibly of a fourth wave, this will then bring about the risk again of further lockdown measures, further containment measures, further measures of limiting travel and the like, which will directly impact the economy. As we know, then more people will still, let's say, adopt more measures like work from home or working remotely. Things like that will still also impact the economy. Businesses will freeze hiring, so the labor situation and employment situation will not improve, and we know that the unemployment rate rose significantly last year based on again the pandemic. So businesses will be slower to hire, they'll be slower to expand. If they had any expansion plans for this year, they'll put those on hold, and that will again directly affect economic growth.
Now, Kuria, if you were given an opportunity today, you were sitting on the hot seat as a National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Kuria Tani, what areas would you prioritize as far as budgetary allocation is concerned?
I think stimulus measures to try and revive the economy. What Gladys Wanda put out, trying to bring, and also some of the other remarks around making sure that we can be able to create a fund to try and reduce some of this debt, because you find a lot of SMEs invariably their money is being held at the county government level, national government level, so which has a ripple effect. So I would prioritize a stimulus. I would probably go back to the measures that were introduced last year, the measures that were introduced, the tax measures. I would have thought that they would have been more appropriate now as opposed to last year, because a reduction in tax rates, reduction in VAT has the effect of stimulating consumption, and therefore creating a ripple effect, a multiplier effect, as opposed to increasing taxes in areas that otherwise look quite uncreative and punitive to the common mwananchi.
Yeah. Let me be the devil's advocate here. But the question is, when you say about the reintroduction of the stimulus package, government already said that it lost a cool 62 billion shillings owing to that, that period, that grace period for Kenyans to just try and ride the wave of COVID-19. The question is, can we afford such an expense, looking at where we are as far as the economic is concerned?
Yeah, so just like I've said, I think the issue is when it was introduced. I think it should be now. When you introduce it during containment measures, what it's likely going to do is lead to a loss of revenue, because people are losing jobs, the economy is stifled, industry is not producing at par. So you'd expect that it's not really bringing the effect that is needed. Perhaps such measures would have been better put at a time like now, so that they can then stir economic development, and people then feel that the government is trying to appreciate the fact that people are putting in effort to continue staying afloat, even if there is no consumption really in the economy. Yeah.
The question is the timing.
Yes.
Of when they were introduced.
Yes. Yeah.
Caleb Mugendi, to you now. If you were sitting on a hot seat as a National Treasury Cabinet Secretary, that is Kuria Tani, what areas would you prioritize to make this budget more palatable, especially to Wanjiku?
Well, I wouldn't envy his seat right now.
You wouldn't want, Kuria wants to sit on the seat.
Well, definitely I will try to target areas that will spur demand-driven consumption and demand-driven activities to try and spur the economy. Possibly I will look at giving out direct handouts to people who have been affected directly by the pandemic and maybe have lost their jobs and stuff like that, because that will at least try and inspire more consumption. I'll also look at areas that again, from the county level, there are a lot of SMEs, as my colleague has said, that are still struggling and hurting because the cash flow that, let's say they've done some jobs or they've done a contract, but they've not yet been filled, they've not yet been paid. Trying to release that funds from the county level back to the SMEs will do a great job in spurring more consumption and more demand and more economic activities from the county level and from the SMEs as well.
So from where I'm hearing from both of you as de facto National Treasury Cabinet Secretaries as it is, you'd focus on incentivizing the business community, targeting MSMEs, and also just supporting Kenyans who are really struggling.
Yes.
Trying to bring down, or rather to try and do away with matters of poverty. You really have a majority living under the below the poverty line.
Yes.
But then the question is to both of you as or CSS today, can we afford to do that? Really, can we afford to do that? And if indeed we can do that, what areas would suffer? Where would we make those cuts? Would we start off?
Yeah, so I'd like to say, yeah, so I do agree with you that it's possible we may not be able to afford that. First of all, looking at the deficit that we have, the economy has to keep on moving. So it's clear we cannot afford it. And if you look at some of the countries, the UK in particular, they have actually had to support, like my colleague was saying, they have had to support businesses, pay people salaries that were not earning a salary because their businesses were shut down for one reason or another. But in Kenya, we cannot afford that. The simple reason is because we do not have any reserves that we can fall back on that would allow us to be able to finance that kind of. So we can't afford it. And therefore, I think the focus should be more on stimulation as opposed to adding more punitive. Yeah, perhaps also explore some of the areas that are not, like betting and other areas that have not been mined, but again also try and create stimulus for the economy generally. Yeah. Yes.
So we are dreaming it, but we cannot achieve it.
We cannot be able to afford it.
Is that so?
Yes.
We are dreaming it, but we cannot achieve it.
Yeah,
This standpoint.
I do agree with my colleague. It might not be feasible for us as a country to stimulate the community, maybe possibly through handouts and the like. I will look at trying to bring in more austerity measures. Our recurring expenditure is still also a bit high in terms of the wage bill that we're putting on the government and the like, and try and see where we can cut back, especially on recurrent expenditure, and instead use those funds towards development expenditure and make sure that the development expenditure funds are absorbed more. The absorption rate in terms of development is faster, which will have a ripple effect of trying to stimulate those areas of the economy.
Now, trying to preempt who are going to be the losers and gainers as after this afternoon, it is the final year of the implementation of the Big Four agenda. And the concern is that the full benefits will not have fully been realized by 2022. So what are the options? Because we have infrastructure, we have housing, we have food security, we have the universal health care. What are the options? Let's start with you.
So in my view, I think all those priority areas are equally important. But definitely because of budget constraints and even the time up to when the government has till the next election is not sufficient. So I would still say there is enough time to focus on some of them, not all. Like for example, infrastructure, because infrastructure has got an effect, a multiplier effect, a much greater multiplier effect. Mm-hmm. And if you look at the current infrastructure projects, if they are completed on time and completed well, definitely there is going to be a star in the economy. There is going to be that growth. Now, when I also look at universal health, that is something that is very, very critical. And looking at what is happening right now with the pandemic, if we are able to make universal health affordable, we can be able to make sure that our hospitals are well staffed. I think we will be at a very good place. So if I was sitting there, I would probably focus on those two areas. Infrastructure, universal health, I think are critical to make sure that this government, completes its leg quite well. Yeah.
Talking about long term. Now, before we engage Caleb Mugendi, who is an investment associate at Ganges Capital, I'm taking you to Parliament, where my colleague Brian Kimani is on standby, just having conversation with members of Parliament ahead of that particular presentation this afternoon by National Treasury Cabinet Secretary there. Brian Kimani, what is the feel on ground from Parliament buildings?
Well, many thanks indeed, Regina, back there at the Strathmore University. Of course, we are live here at the buildings of National Assembly. And the focus is, of course, on this house, where later on this afternoon, the Cabinet Secretary in charge of National Treasury, Ukur Yatani Ambassador, is expected to come and outline his taxation as well as policy measures to finance the 2021-2022 budget. And of course, his measures are going to be critical in ensuring that there is continued economic recovery as well as sustained economic growth going ahead. And of course, this is coming at a very, very critical time when the country and the world at large is going through a serious and a debilitating pandemic in the name of coronavirus. We have seen how it has managed to scoop our economic growth back here in Kenya from a high of 5.6% in the year 2019 to around 2.5% last year. And the question is, will the situation be worse this time around? Of course, we are keeping an eye on the data expected to be released later this year by the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics. But as I told you, we are here at the National Assembly. We are keeping an eye on what's happening inside here because all the eyes of the nations are fixed on this house. Let's now turn on to matters budget. And of course, I'm joined by Honorable Peter Wandayi, as a Member of Parliament for Uguja, as well as the Chair of the Public Investment Committee, and Peter Ole Sankok. He's a nominated Member of Parliament, as well as representing persons with disabilities, and a member of the Budget, Social and Welfare Committee of the National Assembly. Thank you very much indeed, gentlemen, for joining us here. First of all, we must appreciate that the weather looks absolutely beautiful. Is this probably maybe a sign of things to come from Ambassador Ukur Yatani?
Well, it's difficult to tell. But Brian, before I proceed, let me just make a correction. I'm not Peter. My name is Opio Wandai.
Oh,
yes.
He is Peter, actually.
And,
David.
And his name is David Sankok. Yes. But I represent Ugunja constituency in the National Assembly, and I also chair the Public Accounts Committee.
Yes.
Of the National Assembly in this 12th Parliament. Clearly, Brian, this is a historic day for Kenya in two respects. One is historic in the sense that this is the last budget that we are making in the life of this Parliament, in the life of the 12th, well, the second last budget, yes, in the life of the 12th Parliament, okay? You know, the last budget will be basically made 2 months to an election.
Yes.
So it won't have much effect.
In the year 2020.
Yes, but this is the real budget that's going to have impact for the remaining period of this term of Parliament and term of the President, okay? Yes, and secondly, it's a budget which is coming in the wake of serious economic meltdown, if I may call it so, occasioned by the COVID-19 pandemic, which is a worldwide phenomenon, really, as you know. Yeah, so what I would expect, really, the government to focus on is those measures that would cushion the vulnerable in society, who have really borne the brunt of this COVID-19 pandemic. Yeah. Yes, I would expect those measures that deal with the social welfare of our people.
Yes.
Yes.
I want you to hold on to your thought because I'll be coming back to you in regard to that thought. You're talking about the measures that will safeguard our social fabric as a society. David Ole Sankok,
yes.
As a Member of Parliament representing people with physical disabilities, we have seen a situation whereby the budget of the National Council on people with disabilities, we have seen their budget being slashed by about 250 million shillings. are we really serious when it comes to looking at the welfare of people who are more at risk of sliding back into economic poverty?
When I saw the budget, I was as shocked as you are, because clearly then it is not only insensitive from the side of the government, but really not taking care of its own citizens who they are vulnerable, the lower cadre of our people. And if there is anybody who is vulneralized, it is those persons with disabilities. First of all, we dependent, 80% of the assistance that we offer to persons with disability depend on donations and philanthropies and even religious organizations, all of them of which were closed during this pandemic. So we expected probably to increase the budget. But the budget has been cut by 250 million out of a budget of 600 million. And the money that they cut is called development fund. And the development fund in the National Council for Persons with Disability is fund for wheelchairs. We have people in this era crawling in our streets. We have children with disability crawling into that dirty pit latrine, using their force. And then they're again using those soil arms to eat food. You find them, their self-esteem is a bit lower. We have cut the budget for education assistance for persons with disability. They don't have plan B. Yeah. It is either they go into education and become doctors and engineers, or they go to the street to beg. And I expected that vulnerable group should have been cushioned more than any other thing. And then again, lastly, there's a lot of stall projects. Mitihani House started in 1986. The standard gauge railway, you people of the media used to say a rail to nowhere. I did not believe you until I went to where the phase 2B terminates in a remote area called Murutoto with one shop and one butchery. That is where the phase 2B, 52 kilometers of rail, where we have pumped billions of Kenyan taxpayers' money, have ended up.
But you see, it's also good to put things into perspective. I mean, the fact that, the railway ends up in that section, it doesn't mean that that is the final destination. We know for sure that there are plans. And the construction of the standard meter gauge line all the way to Naivasha and proceeding all the way to Nakuru and all the way to Kisumu is currently underway. So it's improper to say that it terminates at that point. But back to the question that we are asking, and the beauty of it is that you're a member of parliament. Your role is to ensure that the welfare of people with disability is looked into. When you have a situation whereby 250 million shillings is cut off from the budget of people with disabilities, as a member of parliament, what is your next course of discourse?
Of course, we have lobbied members of parliament. We have decided that one will not be slashed. If there is anything, they can increase. But they cannot even slash a coin from National Council for Persons with Disability. OPU and I is here. But when I talk over standard gauge railway ending in Murutoto, I know what I'm talking about. Because 52 kilometers from the Suswa dry port towards Narok, only 12 kilometers shy of Narok, it have stalled. It have been diverted all the way from Suswa dry port, meter gauge railway to Naivasha, meaning the other one, there is no need of the other one. Instead of terminating it in Narok town, where there will be a catchment area of even people transporting their goods.
Very soon I'm going to engage you on that topic and probably maybe invite the people who are in charge of that project so that we can have a fair discussion. But today our focus is on, the national budget, which is expected to be outlined later this afternoon. And you have touched on the role of the Public Accounts Committee to ensure that, there is proper accountability in public management, in the management of public funds. Opio Wandayi, he has said, or he has enumerated some of the challenges being faced by, as PAC chair, what would you say about that?
Well, first of all, as at PAC, we deal with analysis of what has been spent, okay? We essentially look at how public funds have been utilized. Yeah. But this is actually the beginning of the cycle, because the budget is a critical component of this whole cycle of public finance management. Okay? But I must appreciate one thing, that the Cabinet Secretary for National Treasury, Mr. Ukuria Tani, is walking a tightrope. Is trying to carry out a delicate balancing act, in the sense that our revenue levels, our revenue capacity is really constrained. really constrained. Yeah. And you will realize from his budget speech today that the bulk of the money that is being earmarked for the funding of this budget is going to be borrowed, either locally or from outside sources. Now, that's a very big challenge, as you know. Okay? So the government is going to grapple with the serious issue of recurrent expenditure, okay, which is borne largely by the bloated workforce and so on and so forth. But there's also other obligations which are mandatory, and these include the debt repayment, okay, which we have had to grapple with for all this time. So it's a very, very delicate balancing act. But what I've been saying all along, even in the report of the Public Accounts Committee, which we are currently debating in Parliament, we have stressed this fact, that it is important that the government remains realistic. That if you know you don't have enough resources, then you plan with what you can have, what you have really. You don't go out being too optimistic and planning with monies which you don't know where they're coming from, okay? And you know borrowed money is very expensive to the economy and to the people, really, okay? So let the government cut its cloth according to its size. The Honorable Sankok has talked very eloquently about stalled projects. The reason why these projects are stalling is simply because of lack of budgetary allocation, lack of money, lack of exchequer release, okay, from National Treasury to finance these projects. And why do we have lack of exchequer release? Because the KRA is not collecting enough money to be able to finance these budgets, okay? So then, why then we have to go back to where we are already? Instead of coming out, we are in a ditch. Instead of coming out, we are digging deeper. You see, by engaging in grandiose plans, which we are unable to finance given our revenue capacity.
But you see, those projects, you know, for them to be approved, I mean, they have to come through the process of National Assembly, whereby the National Assembly has to say, okay, and we are living at a very extraordinary time, which calls for extraordinary actions. As members of Parliament, it behoves upon you to ensure that you know, we are living within our means.
Brian, as I conclude,
yes,
you will realize that this budget making process has been long. It has gone through the committees of the House.
Yes.
Okay? And all these issues I'm talking about have been raised. And they will continue to be raised, even after today. Okay? So we are playing our role very, very adequately as members of the National Assembly. Yeah. Our budget, our oversight role in the budget-making process. Thank you very much, Honorable Sankok, can continue.
You don't have to leave without my permission, but I can allow you to leave. I know you're in a hurry, but thank you so very much. We'll continue engaging with you. That is Peter, Opio Andai. He's a member of Parliament for Gunje and also the chairman of Public Accounts Committee. He's rushing, but we're still in the company of David Sankok, who is a nominated member of Parliament representing people with disability. We're discussing how to ensure that the social welfare and the social fabric of the Kenyan society is well maintained. When you hear of suggestions, you know, to start taxing LPG gas, you know, to impose a 16% VAT on LPG gas, in a country where more than 1 million people use some dirty cooking methods, what conclusions do you make?
You know, I think we are putting our priorities totally wrong, because we have used a lot of time discussing the issues of BBI and singing reggae throughout the country, instead of knowing that we are in the midst of a pandemic where our citizens need cushioning rather than taxing. We had forgotten the Big Four agenda, where we will have had 500,000 units per year, meaning by now we will be having close to 2 million units, which the government will have been collecting revenue rather than taxing the citizen, because when the government have units, structures, 500,000 per year, it will have been collecting enough rent, which will translate to reduction in terms of revenue allocation. We have also to widen our tax base, and we have advised Treasury to put more money into KRA, because you can't send KRA to collect money, yet they don't have the capacity, simply because they don't have money. KRA have told us, and I've discussed with KRA, how can you be able to collect more money? They said with every shilling they are given, they can be able to collect 100 shillings. That means 100%. Meaning, we will put more money into KRA. If you put 2 billion, That translates to almost $1 trillion that they, $2 trillion that they will be able to collect. So we really need to invest in where the priority areas are. And you know, when I was talking about stall project, do you know currently in Kenya, we have stall project worth 8 trillion. 8 trillion.
Are you talking about stalled or delayed?
Stall projects. How do you call delayed project Mutiani House that started in 1986? What do you call about tourists, the Ministry of Tourism giving a tender of 18 million in the year 2007-2008 after the famous handshake? And then up to now, we have already paid 200 million and we owe them 70 million. Is that a stall project or a delayed project? It's not a delayed project. They are playing tactics, stalling the project so that they can collect more money. What happened with the Arol and Comorel Dam? It was cancelled because of political reasons, yet it cost Kenya a lot of money. So,
David, you must agree with me that, there are a number of things that definitely, have not gone right. And there are also many things that have gone right.
Many things go
right. But we also have to accept the fact that, sometimes you plan, but you end up failing. So here we are. We are in some sort of a hole whereby we are in a deep economic crisis. How do we get out of there? Number one, without hurting anyone. And number two, ensuring that we do not deaccelerate our economic growth.
That is the suggestions that we're giving as members of parliament, because the budget implementation is squarely on the executive. Ours is to try and approve what they think. They bring estimates, and ours is to try and reallocate and analyze. And as the chairman of Public Accounts Committee have said, their role is to audit and see what have gone wrong. And even before we read the budget yesterday is when they tabled their report, so that the report can inform our way of making the budget. That is why our way of making the budget is when they inform us through their report that there is 8 trillion worth of Kenya shillings stall projects. So we don't want stall project. We want every project to be completed before we start new ones. Because a stall project means it is not economically viable. It is not giving Kenyan returns, yet we have already pumped in money. I've talked of 52 kilometers standard gauge railway. Now it is open for vandalism from scrap metal dealers, yet it is Kenyan money. It is not transporting what is supposed to be transporting. If it was in Narok, it would be transporting wheat, barley, animal and animal byproducts, soapstones and so on. But now we have stole it, we are not gaining from it, and we have already pumped in money. So that is what we are saying. And we are saying that for the National Council for Persons with Disability, let Treasury know not a coin will be slashed.
We'll be looking to see how that augurs, going forward. David, thank you so very much indeed. Let's keep engaging on these issues because we all mean well for the nation, for this nation, and of course for the future of.
Member of the Jubilee administration.
Well, I'm not very much concerned about that, but there you are. So thank you so very much indeed for joining us. That is David Oleson Kauk. He's a Member of Parliament nominated representing persons with disabilities, joining us here to give us his views and his thoughts on the budget that is expected to be outlined later on this afternoon by Treasury CS Ambassador Ukur Yatani. Well, we'll keep engaging more members of Parliament from here to hear their thoughts and, of course, how they are making the budget-making process a better process and a more involving project as well. Back to you at Strathmore, Regina Manyara.
Thank you very much, Brian, for that concise interview there, just putting into perspective expectations from members of Parliament ahead of this afternoon's proposal, or the presentation of the budget, their proposed budget. Now, what I've heard from that, O'Brien, is that we had there Opio Udai, a member of PAC, the chairman actually there, saying that we do not, as Kenya doesn't need to plan with what it doesn't have. Question is Kenya biting too much? 3.66 trillion shillings is what government intends to spend for the financial year 2021-2022. But do we have the money? Let's talk about matters of financing that particular budget. We start off with you, Kuria, there. Now, Irene Mchuma, before we ask that question, that is what we're going to be tackling on the second part of our interview here, coming live from Strathmore Business School. But over to you, Irene Mchuma. Later on, we're going to be answering that question. How are we going to finance, or how is government intending to finance that budget that has already been termed as ambitious? Over to you, Irene.
Regina, a good interview there from the Strathmore University. Before I let you go, Regina, expectations are high, especially this afternoon, where we're expecting Finance Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani to make his way from Treasury to Parliament buildings. I believe before the interview, we were able to interact with a number of students who are at the vicinity. And what would we say is their expectations ahead of the reading of the 3.66 trillion shillings budget this afternoon? Regina? Well, Regina Manyara will be getting back to her later on in this live broadcast. This as she engages tax experts and economists live from the Strathmore University. Now, the team is wide. My colleague Alan Aoko is on the streets of the city here in the county of Nairobi along the central business districts, and he would like to bring us the picture at the Central Business District now that also Kenyans have a tendency of going around the Parliament buildings these as they not only watch the colorful ceremony where his Excellency Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani will be making his way to Parliament buildings, but also having their hopes high that they would be listened to and things would turn out to their expectations. Alan, good morning to you.
Good morning, Irene. Yes, this morning we are pitching camp here at the Nairobi CBD at one of the most busiest streets here at Archives, where we are trying to sort the views of Kenyans. Of course, you've heard about all the numbers, the 3.66 trillion shillings budget. And so we just want to get a feel of what they are talking about, because they are saying there's a lot of numbers, but they want to know how these numbers are actually going to affect them physically in their pockets, whether it's going to trickle down. Of course, you can remember about the challenges, for example, the tourism industry got, where 80% of earnings was wiped out by the COVID-19 pandemic. People are still reeling from this pandemic. So Kenyans want to know how the budget that is going to be read this afternoon is going to, line their pockets with something small, or at least a stimulus package. Let me just try and speak to one or two people just to get a feel of what they think about this budget. Karibu sana.
Asante.
Labda uanze na majina yako.
Yes.
Na unaonaje hii budget yenye tunaenda kusomewa leo?
Okay, majina yangu ni Evangelist M. Charles na nashukuru Mungu. Jambo la kwanza kwa hii budget, as you can hear from the public, people are not happy. Because sasa serikali ya Kenya huwa inapangia kitu yenye haina, na ndio sasa iweze kupata ile kitu yenye imepangia, it has to come back to us as wananchi. Sasa kile kitu mimi ningeuliza, serikali kwanza imeangalia whether the environment in the country can enable them to get the necessary taxes from people, kwa sababu biashara zimeisha. So mimi kile naweza sema hii budget itakuwa mzigo, kwa sababu serikali inapangia ile kitu yenye haina, na baada ya kupangia hizo pesa haziedi specifically to the reasons that is supposed to go, inaibiwa. So hiyo ndio imekuwa shida kubwa hapa Kenya. Tunapangia ile kitu yenye hatuna.
Na sasa kama ungeweza kuongea na waziri wa fedha, ungemwambia nini kwa siku kama leo?
Kwanza waziri, okay, ni sawa tu, kwa sababu sasa hata budget kusoma hapa nchini Kenya, it is now like a tradition. We know after each and every year there should be a budget. Kwanza wa consult waangalie what is now happening, apangie kulingana na vile kulivyo. Ukipangia 3.6 trillion, do you have them? You don't have. So where will you get this money? From the taxes. You tax people, they don't have something to be taxed. So ageangalia hiyo kwanza, lakini maana sasa wakati umewadia, we don't have any other alternative except kumkubalia sasa asome kama tu kawaida. Yes.
Asante sana, wacha tuendelee kupata maoni.
Yes.
Let's just get more views. Later we'll get for you more views, of course. But for now, let us, pitch camp here and get more views at the point where we get, more information on what Kenyans feel about this coming budget. But for now, I hand you back as we sort many more Kenyans for you at this point.
Alan, before I let you go, could you have, all right, Alan Aoko trying to get more Kenyans to raise their concerns ahead of the reading of the budget 2021-2022. Remember, earlier on I mentioned there's a colorful ceremony expected right at Harambee Avenue, where Kenyans normally throng the area. It is a tradition for them to see how the cabinet secretary makes his way from the treasury buildings to the parliament buildings, where he's going to read out the budget. Now, the National Treasury has proposed 135.2 billion shillings towards the Big Four agenda in the 2021-2022 fiscal year. The allocation is 7 billion shillings higher than the 128.3 billion shillings allocated to the projects in the current financial year. The chair of the Budget and Appropriations Committee, Kanini Kega, says the full benefit of the Big Four agenda projects would be realized after the 2022.
In 2017, President Uhuru Kenyatta unveiled the Big Four plan for the next 4 years. The Big Four agenda is anchored on the pillars of food security, manufacturing, universal health coverage, and affordable housing. With barely 15 months to the end of President Uhuru Kenyatta's 2 terms, there are concerns whether his government will achieve the intended milestones. In the 2021-2022 budget, National Treasury has proposed 135.2 billion shillings towards the Big Four agenda. The amount is a slight drop if compared with the 450.9 billion shillings allocated to drivers and enablers of the development plan in 2019-2020 financial year. But the chair of the Budget and Appropriation Committee, Kanini Kega, says Kenyans would soon start feeling the full benefit of the Big Four agenda.
This being the final year of implementing of the Big Four agenda, the current administration, the committee is concerned that the full benefit of the Big Four agenda may not be realized by 2022. It is therefore important for the strategies that will be implemented beyond 2022, notably the 4th medium-term plan.
In the next financial year, the National Treasury has proposed to maintain the allocation to the manufacturing pillar at 18.4 billion shillings, for which the drivers would take up 5.1 billion shillings. Those in the manufacturing sector say the COVID-19 pandemic has disrupted performance. The president had pledged affordable healthcare to all Kenyans and 500,000 affordable housing units by next year. In 2019, the government delivered the first round of 228 low and affordable housing units to Kenyans. Owing to COVID-19, the universal health coverage budget has been reduced by 2.3 billion shillings. In the final estimates tabled Wednesday in the National Assembly, the National Treasury has proposed 47.7 billion shillings towards UHC from the current 50 billion shillings. On affordable housing, about 14.8 billion shillings has been proposed, with enablers taking 13.2 billion shillings of the budget. In the budget, the National Treasury CS is expected to balance between post-COVID economic recovery and implementation of President Uhuru Kenyatta's Big Four agenda.
Well, the coastal region is known for its white sandy beaches, an attraction that has continually earned not only the region but the country at large billions in revenue. In fact, one of the areas at the coastal region has one of the finest beaches, being ranked among the top 10 in the world, and this continues to boost the hospitality industry in the region. Earlier on, I engaged Junei Karisa on the state of affairs ahead of the budget reading at Parliament buildings this afternoon. Junei, what more do you have for us?
Hi, Muchuma. As you have put it, we have been engaging, of course, with some of the stakeholders in the hospitality sector just to tell us their proposals on some of the budgets. But allow me to talk to some of the wananchis here who have a view or two on the expectations of today's reading. Karibu sana. Niambie, wewe unatarajia leo waziri akusaidieje wewe kama mkazi wa Mombasa?
Mimi
anza na majina.
Majina naitwa Mboto Junior. Kama mkaaji wa Mombasa, kwangu mimi sioni kama mwananchi kuna kitu atatafaidika na hii budget, kwa sababu one, kama sisi hatuwezi kujimudu na ile budget sisi tunapata hapa, hatuwezi tukajisaidia kama Wakenya. One, tunakopa pesa nyingi tuende tukalibe mandeni, of which 70% of the money that is going to be, ile ambayo inapatikana inaenda kuliba mandeni. Ni kumaanisha kwamba 30% ndio inabaki ilijenge barabara, inunue mandawa, ilipe wafanyikazi na environment, which is very little.
So are you for the government borrowing pesa ama wewe uko wapi?
I'm against that. Okay. Kwa sababu hata ikikobwa hatuoni faida ya pesa ile inakobwa. Katika ile kukoba si bibaya, lakini ile inatumika katika 90% ndio inaibiwa. So 10% ndio tunabaki na sisi wananchi ndio tunaliba hiyo pesa. Okay. One, kama saa hii nikiangalia ile makabiliano ya budget ambayo nani ametengeneza, ni kumaanisha kitu kama mkate unapanda. Chakula ambaye sisi tunalima hapa inapanda. Mkate unapanda. Ni kumaanisha mwananchi anaumia. Sasa alafu kuna vitu vingine vinafanywa katika hiyo budget. Ukiangalia kama ile pesa imewekwa katika hospitali ama katika Ministry of Health ni nyingi sana. Yaani national government wanabaki na pesa na county government wanapewa pesa, of which katika health imekuwa involved. Ni kumaanisha hakuna pesa inastahili kubaki wapi? Kubaki katika national government. Other money ni kwamba katika Minister of Interior imebaki na pesa nyingi sana, which is very, hiyo ni vibaya. Pahali ambapo pesa zinastahili kuwekwa, sio zinastahili kusaidia mwananchi kama education ama agriculture, asiwekwi, zinawekwa kidogo, ndio national government wabaki wakiiba ile pesa.
Okay. Wacha tu nipate maoni ya mwingine. Wewe niambie, unataka sekta gani iwekezwe zaidi ambayo itakusaidia wewe kama mwananchi wa hapa Mombasa?
Sekta ambayo kwanza kabisa, majina yangu ni Nyachai Junior, na nilikuwa nasema ile sekta ambayo tunataka iongezwe pesa ni mambo ya mikopo ya benki, hizi SMEs, hizi benki ndogo ndogo ya kuweza kuwafikia wananchi.
Je, uko sawa na yale masharti ambayo yamewekwa?
Kwa saizi naweza kuwa si sawa vile, lakini niko sawa. Kwa sababu gani? Kwa saizi watu wanatarajia mwamko mpya. Unaona, kwa mfano serikali ambayo Uhuru Kenyatta alikuwa nayo na Ruto, silikuwa na mtafaruku mwingi sana. Kulikuwa na mfutano, huyu anafuta huko, anakuta huko.
Mimi nataka kujua kuhusu mikopo ya benki. Yes. Uko sawa na yale masharti ambayo benki imekuwekeza, ama ungependa serikali ikuongezee muda wewe kama mfanyabiashara hapa kaunti ya Mombasa ili kuweza kujisaidia wewe kama kibiashara?
Junei Karisa, we do apologize also for that technical hitch. Junei Karisa, based in the county of Mombasa, interacting with locals and knowing their views ahead of the budget reading 2021-2022 this afternoon. Back to the Strathmore University, my colleague Regina Manyara has been engaging tax experts and economists since the early morning hours. Regina, before we break off from you, I asked you, were you able to interact with a number of students and perhaps hear from them their expectations now that they have also been affected? Remember, the transport effect comes also to that student at the Strathmore. Tell me, what do you have?
Well, when we arrived this morning, Irene and Chuma, the students were already in for their lectures, so we've not had an opportunity to quite interact with them in regard to the budget presentation set for this afternoon. But I have two gentlemen with me who are our panelists on this side, an investment expert as well as a tax expert. And we are moving into addressing the issue of how government intends to finance this budget that has already been termed as too ambitious. There, borrowing heavily from those particular clips that we have just played for our viewers, is that the Big Four agenda still remains a priority for this particular government. But also experts have said that we might not realize the benefits, the full benefits of the Big Four agenda in 2022 owing to the timelines. And thus now this puts the question, and I'm going to put it to this gentleman, what is the plan way forward? What's the way forward when it comes to Big Four? Should we plan for Big Four agenda beyond 2022? Secondly, Kenyans there are quite expectant of, the presentation of the budget 2021-2022, with some of them already resigned to the fact that really nothing much can be done for Wanjiko, and that the presentation will go on whether their views are taken account of or not, because this is a process that already began. We're also going to be looking at the budget process and participation of the public during this particular process. Now, I still have Caleb Mugendi, there, an investment associate at Genghis Capital on my left, as well as John Courier, who is a tax expert and partner at Cody Africa. Gentlemen, so much has been said there. This was just an overview of what has been said since morning. Let's start off with the issue of financing the budget. We already have, government targeting to collect revenue at 2 billion, shy of 2 billion, which is an increase of 210 billion shillings from what was approved by the BPS. We also have ordinary revenue being around 1.8 trillion shillings. We have income tax that is projected to increase by 102 billion shillings to 835 billion shillings. More so, VAT is going to earn the government 473 billion shillings, while excess duty has been termed at around, or rather estimated to get to around 241 billion shillings. Import duty at 119 billion shillings. Question is, have the current tax enhancement measures contained in the BPS adequately addressed issues that have, over the years, made us miss the revenue targets? Let's start off with Mugendi.
Sure. As again, we've highlighted that the tax target is continuing to increase, based also on the ambitious budgets that come out every year. So we also need to grow our taxes. In terms of getting the revenue, from the various revenue sources and revenue streams that the KRA has at its disposal, income tax is one of the bigger chunks, that contain one of the bigger chunks. But this is also dependent on companies hiring workers and also paying their corporate taxes. And in this economic situation that we found ourselves in, a lot of businesses are not doing as well, and this might affect that revenue stream. However, as has also been pointed out, the tax net has to be widened to bring in more people, more organizations to pay their fair share of taxes. So I'll say that the tax, as the tax net widens, we've seen a lot of times the KRA has not met its target, but in the current fiscal year there's been a bit of an improvement towards meeting their target based on some of the strategies that they've employed, trying to rein in more tax cheats, trying to expand the tax base, and also in terms of becoming more effective at getting digital tax into that mix.
Mm-hmm. Now to the tax expert. Now this is your forte. Yeah. This is your piece. What do you think? Have the tax enhancement measures actually tried to correct the revenue, or rather
decline in revenue. What do you think from it?
Yeah, so looking at the revenue targets that have been set in the past and the performance of the Revenue Authority, I would say the enhancement measures have actually helped to boost revenue. Now we are seeing an increase of almost 210 billion against revenue collection measures that are now sort of stifled. And what do I mean by that? The space we are in is the Revenue Authorities doesn't have as much creativity. We've seen the suspension of minimum tax. This happened because the court in Machakos ruled that it be suspended, at least for a period until the ruling, which is supposed to happen any time now, before the end of this month. After the ruling, then we can see what's going to happen. So minimum tax was one of the areas they were pegging. Already, just looking at the increase in income tax alone, about 100 billion from last year's targeted budget collections, we can see the areas, because this budget doesn't address a lot of direct income tax measures that would bridge that gap. It's either through enhancing collection measures, which the Revenue Authority keeps on doing, or making tax broader, broadening the tax net. But the only way that can happen is by having a vibrant economy, having tax measures that are more friendly to people, making sure that you're cognizant of issues that are, like now we're coming from a COVID, from a constrained economy point of view. So what I would say is that realistically, I would expect that the Revenue Authority would only be able to meet these measures if they are able to implement or widen the tax base and ensure that, issues like minimum tax are implemented well, digital services tax is also implemented well, all those measures that have been outlined in the finance bill. Yeah.
Not talking about widening that tax base, so to speak. There's always been a target. Jua Kali sector has always been targeted in this, but somehow we do not get them fully on board. From where you sit at this point, what have we been doing wrong, or what has been the government doing wrong, in trying to widen this tax bracket and include the Jua Kali sector? Because if you look at the map, they are a majority who are missing from this particular net.
Yeah. So if I give an example of presumptive income tax, which was introduced last year, and then it could not generate enough revenue, so they just let it go, or it was stopped. I would say that it's targeting, it's not coming up with a tax measure that is realistic. 15% of the fees that was payable, because presumptive income tax was based on paying 15% on your license, which was quite punitive. If you look at the small businesses, it's quite punitive. So I would say that coming up with measures that would be the common mwananchi would feel, or businesses would feel, is not too punitive. The same issue we are having with minimum tax. So minimum tax is not a bad idea. It has been implemented in other parts of the world. But again, when in the initial stages of setting up a business, you'd expect that a business can be in losses. You cannot start penalizing a business right from year one, because that would mean you're paying minimum tax, or you're paying a tax out of your capital. So therefore further, draining, or it's like you're paying money out of your own, the capital from your own pocket. So come up with realistic measures. So I would say the reason we've not been able to tap into that sector is perhaps because we are not creative enough. And the kind of measures that we come up with sometimes tend to be quite punitive. Going lower on minimum tax would probably have made it more friendly, ensuring that you give businesses a period beyond which then they start paying minimum tax. So initial 2 or 3 years where you're not taxable, whether you're in losses or profits, or minimum tax is not going to be applicable. But indeed, we do know that there are businesses which are in this economy that have been in perpetual losses for 20, 30 years without contributing a shilling to the exchequer in terms of corporate tax. So I would say be more friendly, and I think that is why we are not achieving our targets. Yeah.
So if we were to get, because we know this minimum tax moved from 3% to 1%, what percentage would you be suggesting that would be favorable, with even without leniency of 2-3 years for a business?
Yeah. So So I would probably do it. First give a grace period, beyond which then, if you're still in losses, then you start paying. And I would probably target 0.25%.
0.25. Now let's talk about VAT. That's the crux of the matter. Now, amendments to the proposed amendments to the Finance Bill 2021 propose, VAT to be put on, essential goods. Some of them, infant milk, bread, motorcycles, and such. At a time when Kenyans are really decrying the high cost of living, then, and we have heard what Kenyans are saying on ground. Is it the right timing for such? What would inform such a proposal? Let's start with you again.
I will say that it is the cost of living is getting more hard, more expensive by the day, and it's also putting more strain on the common mwananchi and on Wanjiku. Especially if let's say you want to become a parent, you now have to pay more in terms of the infant formula milk. You have to feed your family. You pay more in terms of bread and the like. You want to go maybe. Fuel prices are also rising by every other month, so it's getting very expensive. The cost of living is getting quite expensive. So it's either you now make the decision either to cut back on some items or remove, maybe relocate to the rural areas or something like that. Those are now the decisions that families will start having to look at because again the economy is not doing well. A lot of laborers are either not making as much as they used to, or even earning less. Some are even out of jobs. So this is becoming quite a strain. So I'll say try and be a bit more creative, as my colleague said, in terms of administering these value-added taxes on goods that possibly won't affect the households as much. We can go possibly to do more in terms of the excise instead of the value-added tax.
Yeah, so lean more on excise. That would be your opinion, more than VAT.
Yeah.
But then again, it's all about generating the income, right? The revenue.
Yeah.
Now, sir, very curious, and some of the feedback that we're getting on our social media platform, the issue of VAT on infant milk. This is not something we'd have thought of 10 years back. Is it because of a change of lifestyle, or is it this a fast-moving commodity? What is happening? Why would Treasury actually target infant or other baby formula, as we refer to it?
Perhaps on a lighter side, I was reading somewhere that over the COVID period, the number of babies have increased. So maybe the government is trying to, react to that. But on a serious note, I think, like I said, the lack of creativity. You see, we've reached the end of the road. We've just taken a facility from IMF. We have promised that we're going to increase taxes. So it's starting to hit where it hurts. So I just feel that this is just a measure that, we've reached a point where we cannot be more creative. There's nothing more to tax. So we just have to start thinking about now getting into areas, LPG, infant milk, all those areas that were not being, that you would expect would, enable the common mwananchi enjoy life better. Currently, we know, a lot of people use firewood. We're trying to transition to LPG, but you can see what's happening. Effective this month, we're going to have cost of gas going up because of, the suspended 16%. And the same, just like you've mentioned, infant milk powder is going to go up by 16%, so which therefore means that it moves from, it's going to be now exempt, which therefore means becomes more expensive, for the common mwananchi or the person who is bringing up a small baby. So I would say it's lack of creativity. To me, I think we're almost at that point where we are grinding, and we just need, and therefore you find the government reducing areas that previously were either zero-rated or, were areas where there wasn't much focus. So it's just a way, it's just a way of trying to expand the tax net and definitely generate more revenue.
While we were starting this particular broadcast, we were going through social media and just asking Kenyans what their expectations were. Those who enjoy a glass of alcohol often have said, leo lazima tutaguswa. sin tax has always been sin taxes as over and over again, but we are seeing now Treasury digressing and going to the basics. So basically, Wanjiko has reason to be quite apprehensive ahead of the budget presentation this afternoon. Now, talking about issues of how Kenya looks in terms of investment, its investment attractiveness, Mugendi. Under the finance bill, some of the proposals are, that exported services be moved from zero-rated to exempt, moved from. What impact will this have on, investment, foreign direct investment, as well as, exported services? Looking at, we have projects like Kansas City that heavily rely on exported services. What does this mean?
Sure. Looking at that, we're trying to make Kenya a bit more attractive for foreign investments, for local investors. So in terms of that, the tax regime has to be a bit more attractive. It has to be a bit easier to start a business and do business within the country. But given if you want to tax some of these services, like the export services, if you want to tax some of them, then it becomes less attractive to do business within the country. So as a multinational, why will I come and set up shop here instead of, let's say, Mauritius, Rwanda, other countries? So this is something that will directly affect the foreign direct investments into the country. If a foreign investor or foreign multinational is looking at starting up shop here, or let's say in a different country. So we still have to, despite the fact that we're still trying to broaden the tax net. I think even multinationals, as long as they've been working or they have a presence in the country for 1 month or so, they still be subject to some form of taxation in the coming fiscal year. But still, we still have to look at it from the point of, will that make us more attractive than our neighboring country or our neighboring competitor? Because in the global scenario, we're still competing against each countries for these same foreign direct investments.
Mm-hmm. Now, withholding VAT tax exemption. Now, this is scrapping the legal regime exempting companies that are in perennial VAT fund. So what impact will this have on businesses, and more so, what will this then mean for the current KRA backlog when it comes to VAT refunds? Kuria.
Yeah, so it's just going to again increase the cost of doing business because the moment you scrap it, it simply means that then you'd find that it becomes more difficult for you to get your refunds and so on. So it's just going to increase cost of doing business. Mm-hmm. And therefore businesses also find that you're tying their money for longer. Yeah. Yeah.
Now, government has prioritized the manufacturing industry under the Big Four agenda, and we have seen issues of cost of energy, cost of operations, affecting, or rather bringing the cost of operations up. Now, in the Finance Bill, the Finance Act 2020, it introduced VAT on heavy machinery. That is the tariff chapter 84 and 85. So what impact will this have on the cost of running, or rather having mega projects from the private sector point of view? Mugendi.
Sure. I'll look at it from the point of increasing. It will increase the cost of a lot of local developers actually lease out these heavy machinery, so they want to outright own them. So even that cost of leasing will increase again with the development process having become a bit more lengthy. There's been a stall in projects. It hasn't been moving as fast. The timelines have not been met. Then it increases their project costs, which will eat into their expected profits, and will generally increase the cost of carrying out these projects. So I, as let's say I'm a local developer, I'll look at it in the fact that now with this extra tax on leasing these machinery, I might not bid for let's say as many projects as I would have initially, based on expected longer time that I'll need to complete these projects, and also now the cost is even higher. Also, the cost of raw materials is also rising in terms of the producer price indexes is still still rising. So even my input cost and my raw materials are still rising at the same pace, and now we're going to be taxed on heavy machinery. So it keeps on. It's a compounded effect. You'll take longer now also to complete these infrastructure projects, these projects that you're undertaking, and it will still cost more.
Mm-hmm. Now, many chance then, what does this mean, for these mega projects? Are we now going to see, multinationals who have the financial muscle coming in, where otherwise local developers would have gotten into that particular niche?
That is what we're looking at. There'll be more like, I'll say, corporations that have a bigger financial backing, that have bigger expertise or a larger capital base, and able to carry out these projects. They're able to withstand the longer period project periods, despite them having fixed project costs and fixed costs. These are now the kind of corporations that will bid for these mega projects going forward.
Now, Mugendi, before we cross over to Kisumu County, let me bring it back to you, Kuria, there. Now, when you talk about the cost of energy is a factor of manufacturing. Now, we understand that there's a proposal now to have now green, or rather solar products, now that were zero rated, to become exempt. What will then mean for green energy? What does that mean for green energy when at time we're seeing a shift to this as a substitute for energy?
Yeah. So the moment product moves from zero rate to exempt, it then means that KRA will then restrict you from claiming any input on that product that you're selling. So which therefore means that in effect, where I would have been able to claim any input in manufacturing or in making those products, I can now no longer claim it, which therefore means that my cost base goes up. And which means that when I'm selling to my customer, then it has built up into that cost and it becomes more pricier for my customer. So what we expect to see from a green perspective is that it becomes now more expensive to go green, which therefore means that solar, which would have been an alternative that we are looking at, now becomes more expensive, and therefore, stifling that agenda where the government wants to ensure that there is clean energy for the future, which has a good effect on our environment. So I would just say it will become more expensive. Yeah.
Now we cross over to Kisumu County to my colleague Achola Simon, who's been on standby since morning, just bringing out views of what Kenyans down from Kisumu County are expecting come this afternoon as National Treasury Cabinet Secretary Ukur Yatani presents the budget 2021-2022. Achola, over to you. Bring us up to speed with what is happening on ground.
Well, thank you very much, Regina. Over the last 1 year, if there are lessons that we've actually learned in this country, has actually been in from the health sector. And of course, a number of challenges have actually emerged following the emergence of COVID-19. And of course, the country has been grappling in terms of ensuring that it can actually surmount those challenges. We have seen over the years, last year and of course this financial year, the government progressively increasing the allocation to the health sector. And of course, this year we're also expecting that indeed they are actually going to increase the funding in terms of the health sector, and actually ensuring that indeed the health sector in this country is in a position to actually handle various issues of pertaining health that might actually emerge in future. And of course, COVID-19, as we continue to actually find a way of living with it, and of course the vaccination as it comes up. But of course, at the footnote of the health sector is actually community health workers. The community health workers have actually been doing quite a lot. Remember, at the onset of COVID-19, initially COVID-19 was actually being handled at the topmost level, and then we moved lower to the hospitals. And of course, we understood that what will happen is that most of the patients will actually be handled at home. Of course, the Ministry of Health encouraging people to actually ensure they're actually taken care of at home. But community community health workers, for one reason or another, they've actually not received the backing they would actually expect, not only from national government, but also county governments across the country. And here with us is Mito Milambo. Mito Milambo is the coordinator of health workers in this region. And just before we went, we came on set, he actually told me that just from last year up until now, they've actually lost close to 20 members of community health volunteers in this county alone. That, of course, paints a picture of exactly what is happening across the country and what actually needs to be put in place in terms of ensuring that this vital component, or what you'd say the first step in terms of healthcare in this country, is actually taken care of. Mito,
yes.
20 people. That's quite a number.
Yes, 20 people have died because of this COVID cases.
Just increase your voice, please.
Yeah. Because of this COVID, we have lost at least 20 people. Only Kisumu County. Because of most of us, we don't have the health insurance cover. Because we just struggle to get it.
Now, looking at what has happened over the last 1 year, the challenges that you've actually you've surmounted, what do you expect from Ukuru Yatan today when he's actually reading the budget in terms of allocation of resources to the Ministry of Health and, more importantly, to community health workers?
Yeah, what they should do, what Minister for Health should do, to increase the budget in the Ministry of Health. Sana those going to county level, because most of the things in health is devolved to the county, so they should bring more money to the county health, and the county officials and the county senate or the county ward what they should do, they should see that they do put more money to primary health care. Yeah.
Your complaint has been that you are recognized when there's a pandemic, as we are experiencing today. You want the government to actually move a step further in terms of ensuring that they allocate resources specifically for community health workers, so that then you can actually dispense your duties to the best of your ability.
Yes. What they can do better is, I thank God for the Senate, what they moved the community health services bill. If the government, or the county government, should put this community service health bill, that to recognize, because by now we don't have any bill to support us. We don't have any support to us. But if they can do it, which means if the budget is coming to health budget comes, then there should be a percentage assigned for the community health care, all health workers, or community health volunteers. By now we are community health volunteers. We are just volunteering. But if the county government or the national government should recognize and put a bill, the community health service bill, that is concerned on us to work on primary health care, then at least we shall do better. I hope that only the bill, they should do that.
Mito, lack of recognition, of course, has denied you quite a lot. And you are telling me that even accessing PEPs is a problem.
Very much accessing, because right now in my community, most of the people are coming down, the hospitals are full, they're coming up. But how can I visit a patient? I have to keep distance, and I don't have any PE. The government, the county government, has no money to give us the PE, the protective gears. So I cannot go there. That's why now in the Kisumu, it is increasing very much. Because before we used to do it, but now because of the fear of this protection, at the same time, we don't have our healthcare services cover, even NHIF. We are told to be given Maro, but Maro is not still working. So this is the fear we have and the challenge we have very much. Even again, we have those underlying cases in our households, which means we should go to them, we should advise them. Even the ethics, even our community, they still don't believe, they still don't understand what a COVID is. It is us to make them believe that COVID is real, because they don't believe, but it's the community health volunteers will make them believe that the COVID is real. They don't understand. Why should I wash my hands? Why should I do this? Why should I do this? But because of the effort of the community health workers, we are working, we're talking to them house to house. We're moving house to house to tell them that COVID is real. Because when somebody dies, they say, oh, he just died because of the certain condition, they understand better. But we are telling them COVID is real. So if the county government and the national government can recognize and put this bill, put them into maybe at a 10,000 only, we are very sure we are getting it, and put that into the health insurance cover, I think things should be okay. I hope Ukuru, the minister, will do that.
Fantastic. Lastly, when we're looking at the figures that are actually coming in, the government yet again is focusing more on referral hospitals and national hospitals. You told me that, yes, it is important to actually allocate resources to the referral and national hospitals, but preventive is very much more efficient than actually allocating resources.
Yeah, the English people says prevention is better than cure. If the county want to do better in this one, they should do in preventive care. Because if I prevent malaria, where we prevent malaria, even this corona is a very nice thing because it can be preventable. It can be preventable. If they can put more effort in the primary health care, like dispensaries, than the referral hospital. Because from somebody to go to referrals like Mike Oginga Odinga is far. And here is just nearer to the people, even the walking distance. For example, like this thing is coming with the lung cases. They should not walk longer. They should have the nearer the dispensary, and they should do more effort to this dispensary and health centers. Yeah.
Ultimately, the bill you say must actually be passed.
Must be passed. If the government really is in the love of the wananchi, if they love their people, because a healthy nation is a good nation, but a sick nation is not a good nation. Like Rwanda is doing that better. What they are doing, Rwanda is doing better. They're doing more effort in what? In community health services, the primary health care. If they can do that, I think even corona should be a gone case. Even in America, what are they doing now? Even in South Africa, what are they doing now? They depend on community health workers. Because these are the real people. They put all money to that one. And what I also want to do is that they should be very straightforward. Corruption is also another thing. When it comes, let it come down. Yeah. Let's come down to our level.
Thank you very much, Mito Milambo. Mito Milambo is the coordinator of community health volunteers in this region, of course, spelling out what that vital component of health sector expects from Ukuru Yatan this afternoon, when he will be actually be reading the budget estimates of this financial year. But critically, just pointing out that they've actually lost close to 20 community health volunteers in this county alone, and he says that it would have been far much better if indeed resources would have actually been allocated to that very important community, so that then they can actually continue dispensing their duties of actually creating awareness at the grassroots level in terms of ensuring that indeed they minimize cases of illness in the community. Regina, back to you.
Thank you very much, Achola Simon. There we have been listening in to those, proposals, as well as, just somewhat reminding the government that indeed if it does invest in its human resource, then socioeconomic growth is almost assured there, with keen focus on matters of the health sector. Now, just to give you just a small fact there, it's expected in the budget that is going to be read this afternoon, the Ministry of Health has been allocated 106 billion shillings, with 12.7 billion being set aside for treatment and vaccination. Actually, before I let you go, now, critics have come out to argue that some of these monies that government should pay, for the cost of testing for COVID-19, that fetches, or rather goes for around 5,000, between 5,000 and 10,000. From where you sit and having had that conversation with that gentleman in regard to matters of health, what do you think? Would this be a wise move?
To get your question clearly, kindly, if you can repeat.
The issue of, government just chipping in lowering the cost of treatment, especially for COVID-19. What is your take, having been in the ground and interacted with that gentleman there who is within the health sector value chain?
Yes, Regina, if I got your question clearly, you're talking about the reduction of treatment costs, especially for COVID-19. Of course, this is an issue that has actually been raised by locals here in Kisumu County and, of course, across the country, and is something that actually needs to be looked at critically. But, of course, as Mito has actually spelled out, we are at the end, reduction of treatment of, this treatment of these ailments is actually actually at the tail end of that food chain, if you want. But he has insisted that there's quite a lot that actually needs to be done. The government actually needs to put resources in the first-line health facilities, and of course, personnel who are actually dealing with communities at the grassroots level, so that then we actually minimize in terms of people seeking Medicare in health institutions across the country. And he says that if that actually happens, then the cost of treatment in this country will drastically go down. And of course, those resources will actually be used in terms of enhancing the infrastructure in the health sector.
Thank you very much, Shola, for that response. We'll be keeping tabs, just trying to unpack, the proposed budget 2021-2022, where all eyes are focused on that particular briefcase that is going to be carried by the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary there, Ukur Yatani, all the way from the Treasury building to Parliament there. And we know we have even O'Brien Kimani, who's on standby in Parliament to bring us up to speed with activities just a few hours away before that particular entry by Ukur Yatani signals the beginning of, just knowing what we have in place of fiscal planning for the financial year 2021-2022. Now, taking back, or rather coming back to the conversation that we're having here at Strathmore Business School, where I'm joined by John Courier, he's a tax partner at Cody Africa, as well as Caleb Mugendi, an investment associate at Ganges Capital. The question is, we have an ambitious budget, or rather a budget that has been termed as ambitious at 3.6 trillion. What policy changes have been put in place to support, government or rather financing this particular budget? Let's start off with you, Mugendi. There is the introduction of common reporting standards just aimed at tackling illicit trade, or rather illicit flow of funds and grafts. Have we come to a point where now we put an aspect of graft in our fiscal planning? Mugendi.
Well, it's something that we've been battling with as a country for quite a while now. I think since for a very long time, but this has ballooned in the later stages of in the previous years. I would say that coming up with ways to seal those loopholes, the graft loopholes, is quite key, because a lot of public funds get misappropriated, and this directly affects the ability of the government to carry out its mandate in execution of the budget, and this generally also affects the economic performance, also affects us as taxpayers and as citizens, because we keep on paying for this graft money. So I would say misappropriation should not be factored in, but it is there. I think the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Committee is doing something to that effect, and trying to recover some of the assets that have been misappropriated. Possibly that could factor into the budget as revenue, expectations of coming getting that back from those misappropriated funds. That's what could be factored in.
Indeed. Yeah. We will not plan for graft, but we'll put down policies that will discourage fraud. Yeah. We will still be keeping up with changes that are going to be effected in as far as policy changes are concerned, to just try and support what government intends to rake in for the financial year 2021-2022. Now, crossing over to the Central Business District, to Alan Aoko, as he gets to interact with Kenyans there, better known to, or rather referred to as Wanjiko. What are the expectations ahead of this afternoon's budget presentation? Over to you, Alan.
Thank you very much, Regina, there in Strathmore. Very nice all-rounded question you've given me there. Since we were here in the morning, we've been hearing views of Kenyans, mixed reactions, but one theme that is sticking with these reactions is that Kenyans want the budget to be more inclusive into their pockets. What am I talking about? For example, look at infrastructure. Look at infrastructure, which always gets a lot of a lot of budgetary allocations, Kenyans are while happy with some of these projects, they still want to see that some of this money is going to social impact programs, you know, like those that go into SMEs, and those that actually go to, you know, empowerment programs in youth, education, and growing small businesses. But just to get a bit of a feel from the horse's mouth, as it were, let me bring in someone to just tell us about what they feel about the budget. Welcome. Maybe start with your name, and then tell us how the budget is going to affect you and what you feel about it.
Okay, my name is Edwin. I'm a student and also an entrepreneur. On my view, the budget allocation, we are currently seeing the current situation of the budget, and many youth right now, they don't have money, and if the government might come up with a strategy of making sure they distribute funds to our youth, it might a good take.
So what do you think about you know, the social programs and vis-a-vis the infrastructure projects that we are having? Should all that money first we keep it away from the infrastructure and go to social programs?
Okay, let me tell you first on the matter concerning the infrastructure of the country. Right now, as a country, we have seen that we have many projects that the government is still underdoing. We are seeing what is happening in Mombasa Road. They are constructing a road there. So I can say let's first focus on the infrastructure. Then when we focus on the infrastructure, then we might be in a position of now reviewing on others.
Thank you very much for those views. Very articulate views there, but let me also just bring in someone, just because of time, understand where we are coming from and where the youth are at this point. Please introduce yourself and tell us what you feel about the budget.
Asante sana, kwa majina ninaitwa Pascal Omoding, na mimi ningeweza kusema kwamba kulingana na hii bajeti ambayo inaenda kusomwa, ningeomba serikali haswa iweze kuangazia sisi vijana, maana vijana wengi kama sasa, hata mimi ni mwanafunzi, lakini baada hata pia ya masomo unapata wengi wetu hatuna ajira. Ni vizuri kama serikali ingeweza wakati wanasoma hii bajeti iweze pia kutenga fedha ya kuweza kusaidia wanafunzi katika vijana katika sekta ya elimu na katika pia uwezo wa kuzindua ajira tofauti tofauti, ndiposa tusiwe na mambo ambaye hayatakuwa mazuri katika jamii.
Labda tuelezee vile unaona budget ni 3.6 trillion. Hii pesa inaendelea kuongezeka. Tunaenda njia gani?
Mimi ningependa kusema kwamba kwa kweli kama Kenya hatuendi kwa njia nzuri, kwa sababu ukiangalia jinsi pesa inazidi kupanda, jinsi bajeti inazidi kupanda, hivyo ndivyo unaona pia hali ya kimaisha, uchumi inazidi kuzorota. Mimi ningependa kuambia serikali kwamba waweze kuangalia jinsi wataweza kupunguza hiyo bajeti, ndiposa pia wananchi wa kawaida waweze kuwa na hali nzuri.
Asante sana, asante sana. Regina, as you've heard and you've seen the passionate and articulate sentiments of Kenyans and the youth especially, is that they want this money to go directly to social programs, something that is that is going to affect them directly. But of course, we'll continue pitching camp here and getting views from all over the city if we can, because you know Nairobi County is the melting pot of a representation of a lot of areas of this country. Back to you, Regina.
You know, being on standby from morning, just getting views from Wanjiko ahead of this afternoon's presentation of the budget 2021-2022. Mixed reactions, yes, as you've said. Some Kenyans optimistic, while others still maintain pessimism, saying that they have nothing to do other than just listen to what Ukur Yatani has in for them. The ones who are optimistic are saying that government needs to look into the issue of the cost of living. Thank you very much, Alan Aoko. Now, crossing over to Broadcasting House, Irene Mchuma, over to you.
Regina, good afternoon. Good job at Strathmore University. Now, Regina, we understand that this year's budget is a bit higher compared to last year, from 2.8 trillion shillings to 3.66 trillion shillings. And on this, we have concerns both from the private sector and the national government. But now that you have engaged the experts for the better part of the morning hours, what would be their take now that the national government has to balance on its mandate before and after the COVID-19, and also bearing in mind that the private sector is against the debt and taxes, considering that from the data from the Central Bank of Kenya, the country is in debt of 7.3 trillion shillings. Regina?
Well, very well put, Mchuma. What we have seen, and even from my panelists this morning, is that indeed Kenya is seemingly biting too much to swallow, given the current macroeconomic situation that is not just very unique to Kenya, but also the whole globe is dealing with the COVID-19 pandemic and its disruptions. From what we heard from investment associate at Genghis Capital, Caleb Mugendi, who is still with me here, is that we need to plan ahead and try and, prioritize key areas that will give stimulus and impetus to the business community. At the same time, tax expert John Courier from Kodi Africa, who is still with me here, said earlier that when it comes to matters of taxation and the taxation policy, going forward, government needs to come up with a concise, tax policy, not one that ever changes either biannually or annually with every financial year, so that investors as well as Wanjiko can adequately plan, not just about their spending, but also investments going forward. So these are some of the issues we're going to be dealing with. And thank you for posing that question, because as we get to the next session of the interview, or the conversation that we're having this morning with the king this afternoon, it's actually afternoon, focusing on budget 2021-2022. Now, the issue of debt to GDP ratio is where we are getting in, answering the question, is Kenya biting more than it can chew? That's the next conversation we're going to be having, and I want to direct it to Caleb Mugendi there. The issue of GDP ratio, it's been quite a bone of contention. What is your take in regard to this as we look at where we are as a country vis-a-vis where we want to go?
Sure. I will say that we are getting into a debt distress situation, whereby typically we term a country as debt distressed when it has a debt to GDP ratio of above 70%, with the public debt stock at around 7.3 trillion and the not so updated figures of our GDP at around 10 trillion. You see, we're already at 73%. So we're already in the debt distress. And what effect will it have to us as a country when we go to borrow? We go to plug our budget through borrowing, let's say from the external community, external creditors, we'll have to pay more in terms of the interest, so that will also increase our interest, our debt servicing costs in terms of interest repayments, and that will also increase our basically, it will still compound to increase our debt even further. So we'll end up paying quite high on our interest costs for the debt that we are going to take subsequently, which is still a lot, because we still want to finance our budget externally with about 30 to 35% of external debt. So especially if we're going to go for a Eurobond, we might end up issuing a Eurobond at higher yields than what we had in the past. That is because our debt service coverage ratio is more than 70%. Our interest payments are more than 70. Our debt to GDP is more than 70%, and then our interest coverage ratios have become much slimmer than before.
Mm-hmm. Now, did we really have an option other than borrowing? Let's start off with you, Mugendi, before we rotate.
Yes, we did have an option, basically stimulating the economy so that we can grow faster, also generating more funds internally from the Kenya revenue authorities, so collecting more funds internally. Yes, we have been growing at a quick pace if you compare us with other countries in sub-Saharan Africa, but not at the fastest rate. Rwanda has outperformed us in the last 5 years. I think also Ethiopia is growing quite faster than us. So stimulating areas of the economy that directly lead to faster economic growth. We have the the fast-growing sectors like ICT. We still have manufacturing that's part of the Big Four agenda. Agriculture, which still remains the biggest backbone of our economy. So stimulating these areas of the economy to widen, to produce more basically as a country could have helped. Also in imposing austerity measures quite earlier might have also reduced our expenditure in terms of the budget, so that we won't need as much money to finance the budget.
Do you think we stand a chance now that we have already borrowed from IMF and it has come with its, measures and guidelines to cut down essential spending?
We don't have a lot of wiggle room now. We can't just pull a rabbit out of our hat and make things right. So we don't have that much wiggle room. Though we'll say that taking on more concessional borrowing might be a better option. We are part of the debt suspension service suspension initiative for this year. So at least we won't be having a lot of debt service in the next fiscal year. So that will alleviate some of the debt repayments that we would otherwise have been required to pay in this coming fiscal year.
There's been talk of to raise the debt ceiling above 9 trillion to give us that wiggle room that you've mentioned. Do you have an option really? Or is it wise?
Looking at it just by the ceiling, I wasn't a proponent of just looking at it from a figure, but basing it on something, and usually we base it on in terms of GDP. So if let's say we increase from 9 trillion to 10 trillion, that is now at 100% of the current GDP. So is that proper planning? I don't think so.
What is your take? Is a proposal to increase the debt ceiling to give government wiggle room and actually for us to implement the budget 2021-2022. What's your take, Kuria?
Yeah, I don't think it's a good idea. In fact, what we are seeing is actually a situation where you're taking debt to service debt. So at the end of the day, what we are having is cyclical kind of motion. So and the question is, when do we get out of this without stimulating the economy such that we grow the revenue base and at the same time grow our GDP? So the same rate at which we are growing the debt is the same rate we should be growing our GDP. GDP is not going to grow without proper stimulus packages. So I think the government is missing out a bit on stimulating the economy, because definitely that's the only way that we are then going to probably have that artificial borrowing wiggle room. Otherwise, at the moment, we are going to quickly get to that ceiling, get into a situation where it's going to be tax collected to service debt first before any development can take place. And we're almost getting there. Yeah.
We are almost getting there.
Yes.
Parting shot from Caleb Mugendi as well as John Kuria in regard to matters of fiscal planning where the country is concerned, given the macroeconomic situation we find ourselves, risks and all. We are anticipating to grow at a GDP of 6.3% and in the medium term 6.1%. From where you sit, you say that is ambitious. One word as you come to a close, as we wrap it up.
Well, we still have to stimulate the economy in order to grow. We have a lot of potential as a country. We have a lot of sectors that we are a very diverse economy in Kenya, so there are a lot of sectors that can stimulate growth in the economy, and that should be the focus. The fiscal deficit has still been around 7%, 7-8%. So we need to bring that down to closer to maybe around 5%, so that we're not plugging most of we're not continuing to plug our budget with borrowing. And apart from that, just try and get the debt a bit lower, get the expenditure also to come down, recurrent expenditure, and try and do more in terms of development and try and grow the economy, and then we should be a bit better on a better footing going forward.
Caleb Mugendi, Investment Associate at Jengis Capital. To you, John Kuria. Parting shot.
Yes. So I think we have shown our resilience. We've actually, in my view, come out better than I would have thought because of this COVID season period. And I think there is still room for us to show our resilience in coming up with measures that would work in tandem with the recovery that we are envisaging. So I just back what Caleb said. We need to come up with more austerity measures, come up with a way of starting our economy, and definitely be more creative in terms of how we come up with tax measures. So we stop relying on the old adage where tax and death are a must. So, and that's what we are seeing, that we are sort of taxing areas. We are expanding the tax net by taxing areas which do not necessarily show creativity. Let's widen it. Let's make it more conducive. That way the economy is then going to, to move in the right direction. Yeah.
Thank you very much, gentlemen, for affording us time from morning. We are almost at 1 p.m. Thank you very much. All eyes are now focused on Ukur Yatani as he makes that particular walk from National Treasury, bearing that particular briefcase that is going to inform government spending for the financial year 2021-2022. Wanjiku, on the other hand, is very much expectant to have this particular fiscal policy paper to put in place measures that is going to elevate, or rather elevate her from where she finds herself with a high cost of living. When it comes to investment, both local as well, or the word to refer to investors, both domestic and international, are keenly looking on the tax policy and how it is going to affect the cost of doing business. Expectations of the growth of GDP has been pegged at 6.3% of GDP and 6.1% in the medium term. It has been termed as ambitious given what we're having when it comes to COVID, and government is also working at reducing the debt vulnerabilities. Debt to GDP ratio is already very worrying, where we have seen that particular debt ballooning to over 50% over the last few years. The hurdles that stand in the way of National Treasury achieving what it has set out to achieve is issues of COVID-19 disruptions, high wages and employment. If this will be met, we will be keenly focusing on what is going to be happening this afternoon at Parliament buildings as Ukur Yatani, the National Treasury Cabinet Secretary, brings forth this particular budget that is highly anticipated. I'm Regina Manyara. I wish you a pleasant viewing and hand you over to Irene Mchuma Odim, live from the Broadcasting House.
Thank you, Regina. Good to have you, Regina Manyara from Strathmore University, where she has been engaging a number of experts. This includes one from the tax industry and one an economist. Glad to have you. It's budget day, not only for Kenya but also for a section of countries in the East African community, but a big day for Kenyans as they are expecting the big announcement from Treasury building, where Ukur Yatani will be making his way to Parliament buildings to read out the 3.66 trillion shillings budget, and expectations are high on positivity ahead of the announcement. Good to have you. Acknowledgements. Simiu Jackson, you say you have been watching KBC Channel 1 from Chesamis. Freddy Tamu, you're saying you're watching KBC Channel 1 from Utawala. Kama Kope, you're saying you're watching KBC Channel 1, and many of you are watching the same, not only here in the home country, but also across the borders. On behalf of the entire team, thank you so much for being with us, but don't go too far. We are still on. Lunchtime News is coming up next. Thereafter, we'll be crossing live to Parliament buildings, where the Cabinet Secretary for Finance, Ukur Yatani, is expected to read out the 2021-2022 budget at approximately 2:30 p.m. My name is Irene Mchuma Odim. On sign language interpretation is Byron Abuli. Good afternoon.
This weekend on KBC Channel 1.
Is your mind thinking what my mind is thinking?
Maybe this rush of a school is finally closing. Will you wipe that smug of a smile out of your face? Is that something to be happy about?
Now guys, I want us to write down the craziest, not the craziest, the most impossible day you'd want someone to do.
My guys, when you are poor, but this thing is very, very important. I got to go.
Madam, what's the hurry for? You mean you don't want to fall in love? You know I'm the only way I can quench your thirst.
I do not have any thirst. Thank you.
Classmates, every Saturday on KBC.
Sauti ya Kenya. Juu milimani na hata mabondeni, Radio Taifa inatamba kutamba.
Sasa unaweza kupokea matangazo ya Radio Taifa loud and clear popote ulipo Western Kenya.
Radio Taifa usisahau, unaweza ukatupata kupitia
ukiwa Busia, Siaya, Vihiga, Mumias, Yala na maeneo yaliyoko karibu. Radio Taifa inapatikana kwenye 104.5 FM, na ukiwa Bungoma, Kakamega, Kiminini, Kipkaren na viunga vyake, pata vipindi na burudani safi kupitia 92.3 FM. Radio Taifa, sauti ya Mkenya.
Tonight on KBC Channel 1.
Seme, will you marry me?
Chatian is your son, and he always will be. What if he goes down the wrong road like you? You wouldn't be bothered to stop